touch away. Monday to Friday at 12:30 p.m. only on Bloomberg Quint.
Good morning. You're watching All You Need to Know on Bloomberg Quint Live. I'm Alex Matthew. First, the headlines this morning. Asian equities were off to a tepid start as traders awaited central bank meetings amid expectations of dovish signals to monetary policy. Larsen & Toubro enters into an agreement with Coffee Day founder VG Siddhartha to buy his 20.3% stake in Mindtree. Some of Mindtree's founders continue to oppose a takeover by L&T. Oil prices have hit their highest level in 2019 after the OPEC called off its planned meeting in April and instead decided to review the output cuts in June. And Anil Ambani averted a 3-month jail term after his company, Reliance Communications, settled dues that it owed the local unit of Ericsson just before the Supreme Court deadline. And Reliance Communications has also mutually terminated its agreement with Reliance Jio for the sale of certain telecom assets as it failed to get the required approval from lenders and the government. Let's talk about the news from the markets in the US. Wall Street stocks finished higher last evening, aided by gains in petroleum companies and banks, which more than offset another drop in Boeing shares. Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle tells you exactly what happened in that session.
Stocks finished modestly higher in Monday's Wall Street session. There were a few whipsaws up and slightly down, at least more so for the Dow and the Nasdaq. This on Brexit uncertainty, but at the end of the day, the Dow finished higher by about 0.25%. The S&P 500 and the Nasdaq climbed by a little more than 0.3%. Now, from a sector standpoint, more of the S&P 500 sectors were higher than not. 7 were higher, including energy, consumer discretionary, and the financials up top. Key sectors. 4 were lower. Consumer communication services, the worst, down about 0.8%. All of this as investors to some degree are treading water ahead of the Fed decision on Wednesday. Now, dragging on that communication services sector, Facebook down more than 3% on the day, down for its third day in a row, losing about 7% over that time period, the worst 3 days of the year. Last week, concerns around outages and a key executive lead being on Monday, a Wall Street bank downgraded shares to hold on the company's privacy pivot, so some declines there for Facebook. But on the other hand, Microsoft, the tech giant, the software giant, hitting a new all-time high on the day. And we also saw some other big tech names climbing, including Amazon, Apple, and while the banks, those banks also did quite well. Bank of America, one of the top performers for the S&P 500. And when you put it all together, stocks ever so slightly, or modestly higher, I should say, with bonds just a little bit lower, that tells you that there was a modest risk-on tone to Monday's Wall Street session. From New York, Abigail Doolittle, Bloomberg News.
All right, with regard to international markets, the other big headline, of course, is that the oil markets are in focus. We'll get to that in a very short while. Before we do, let's talk about the Asian markets. A lot of them have just about opened up. Let's go straight to Rosalind Chin, who's joining us live from the Bloomberg studio. Thanks so much for joining us this morning, Rosalind. Good morning. How's it looking at the start of trade today?
Well, things are looking pretty flat. As Abigail Doolittle said earlier, I think investors really sitting on the sidelines until they know what the Fed is going to do. And that, of course, that policy decision is coming on Wednesday. So right now we have seen the MSCI Asia Pacific Index is pretty flat. It has just flipped into positive territory, up by less than 0.1%. That is as the Chinese markets opened for trade. Earlier, we did see it trading in negative territory. That's because the Nikkei and the Topix and the Japanese markets are trading lower today. So we have the Nikkei down by just a little bit, less than 0.1%, but the Topix trading down by about 0.1% at this point in time. They have, of course, been in the red pretty much all this session. We've got Family Mart, Arumo. Those are among the stocks on the Nikkei, which are trading lower this morning. Now, in China, we have the Shanghai Composite up by a third of 1%, and the CSI 300 making gains of around the same amount. Hang Seng Index not quite doing so well, up by less than 0.1% in this moment in time. We've got companies like HSBC, Country Garden, Ping An pulling the stocks higher on the HSI this morning. And the rest of the region, we see that the Straits Times, of course, is pretty much flat. The S&P ASX 200 making gains of about 1/5%. So very, very mixed picture right now. But I would say that mostly investors sitting on the sidelines. And a quick look at oil, as you had mentioned, we have Brent crude at 67, 66 a barrel, and WTI at 59.12 a barrel. And that is, of course, we saw the WTI near a 4-month high early in the session when OPEC Plus had agreed to hold on to its cuts until June. Back to you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for that, Rosalind. Well, we talk about the OPEC decision in just a short while. A quick update on the Brexit before we do talk about that. Prime Minister Theresa May's plan to put her deal to vote for the third time hit another roadblock, this time in the form of the Speaker of the House of Commons, who invoked a rule from as far back as 1604. I'm not joking, the over 400-year-old rule states that no proposal can be put to vote in the House multiple times unless it is significantly different from the last. Kathleen Hayes of Bloomberg News has more details in this report.
It does seem to suggest that the EU does have some interest, maybe even some stake in helping Theresa May get this deal to the third vote, because, yes, Guardian reporting that they're going to offer to extend the Brexit departure date at the big summit meeting in Brussels, March 21, 22nd, at the end of the week. And why are they suddenly doing this? Well, because changing the Brexit deadline could change the mind of House of Commons Speaker John Burkaw, who says this deal has not changed enough for a vote, essentially torpedoing Theresa May's plan yet again. She was hoping that she could get it up for a vote this week after there were signs that some top pro-Brexiteer Eurosceptic Tories were willing to back the deal, even if it's not the deal they would most like to see. He did this as he invoked a rule dating back to 1604, which says the same rule cannot be repeatedly put to a vote unless it's significantly changed. And that's what he said. Theresa May's bill must be fundamentally different from the one that has been presented to the House of Commons twice if she's going to get the third vote. Here's what she said.
What the government cannot legitimately do is to resubmit to the House the same proposition or substantially the same proposition as that of last week, which was rejected by 149 votes.
And Speaker Burkaw also said he wasn't trying to say this is the last word. His ruling is just meant to indicate to the government that the test it must pass in order to get the third vote. Nevertheless, it clearly has lit a little bit of a fire under the EU now. That's what it seems.
All right, well, those are the cues coming in from overseas. Oil, of course, in particular, is one to watch. Agam Vakil is here to set you up for the day's trade and also to tell you what's happening in the futures and options space. Agam, well, you've seen the cues coming in from overseas, but a lot of individual names to look forward to, not least of which Mindtree and L&T.
Yes, absolutely. I'm looking forward to seeing how they react in trade. But the real question is, can we expect the extend the gains to the 7th straight day? That's the answer that a lot of investors will be looking towards. And at this point in time, at least as far as the SGX Nifty is concerned, we're looking at a 26% gain. So as far as opening goes, well, a likelihood of a further up move. We did see the Nifty move up by around 0.3%. It was, well, a volatile day of trade, but we didn't see as much movement in the mid-cap and the small-cap indices. The banking indices, on the other hand, continued to move up, and it was essentially one of the most important factors which led the indices higher. But how are the ADRs doing? Well, we have Tata Motors up 2% after the clarification that its recall on certain Jaguar Land Rover models will not have any material impact on well, operations. HDFC Bank, ICICI Bank and Dr. Reddy is also up and about. And we have marginal losses for something like Wipro and Infosys, but not too much to speak for otherwise. Well, in terms of your fund flows, FIs continue to put in money in Indian equities. Another 1,800 crores coming in. DIs, on the other hand, moving out as much as nearly 1,300 crores. But well, Reliance Industries, of course, along with Axis Bank and ITC, led the gains. I'm curious to watch how L&T will perform in today's day of trade after the announcement of the Mindtree acquisition. And Infosys, Maruti and L&T, of course, which has been bearing down in the index. Let's wait and watch how L&T comes through. But let's move on and talk about the futures and options space. And this is where we're seeing, well, while we did see a lot of accumulation through the course of the day, that came off to almost flattish movement when it comes to open interest. But coming down to your Nifty banking futures, and that should be up on your screen soon. What we are also seeing is, just as much, so not too much to speak for there either. Now moving on to your range. It's still the 11,000 put, which has max OI on the higher end. It's the 11,500 call, which has max OI. We'll be watching out for that. And there's a little more writing around the 11,600 and 700 calls. So at this point, it does seem like the Nifty's range upside is getting arrested to a certain extent. But let's move on and talk about your VIX, which rose as much as 6.5%. Some concerns coming through now, considering the Nifty is anyway trading at heady levels. The Nifty put-call ratio curiously fell to around 1.66 against 1.77. So the question is, are we looking at, some sort of change here? And Adani Enterprises, IDBI Bank, Jet Airways remain in the F&O ban. And we have Reliance Capital as well, which is in the F&O ban. We also have new stocks in the F&O ban, which is BEML, Just and Reliance Power. And those which move out of the ban is Reliance Infra. So it gets a little bit confusing. So you will have to make sure of which stocks are in and which stocks are out as far as the ADG stocks are concerned in the F&O ban. There's been a lot of churn among all these stocks on a daily basis. Of course, Just Dial and NTPC will remain in focus along with DCB Bank. And let's move on and talk about those which have seen unwinding: Arvind, Reliance Capital, Adani Enterprises, and Reliance Infra, among others, which we'll be watching out for today, Alex.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for that, Agam. Well, let's talk about the big update that's perhaps affecting the oil prices as of now. The Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC as they are popularly known as, scrapped its planned meeting in April and will decide instead whether to extend output cuts in June, when the market has assessed the impact of US sanctions on Iran and once the crisis in Venezuela or the effects of it are clearer. Bloomberg's Stephen Stapczynski has more details in this report.
Right now, everyone has their eyes on OPEC and Russia. Those are the big players in the market at the moment. Russia and OPEC ministers said that they will now hold on to the production cuts that they promised back in December until at least the end of June. They recognize that the market isn't near balance, and because they're holding on to these production cuts from what they promised last year, the market had a little bit more up than was perhaps expected, and they're taking it quite favorably. It's a bullish signal, and it's kind of keeping prices holding at the highest for 2019 so far.
So, Stephen, how pivotal will the June meeting be, given that we're already seeing some cracks appearing in the Saudi-Russia alliance?
That's exactly right. I forgot to mention that they put off a meeting in mid-April. The Russians and OPEC were going to meet in mid-April to decide on whether or not to continue the production cuts from June. They put off that meeting because they said, listen, we're just not really going to know the shape of the market until the end of June. That puts that June meeting, just 3 days before or a week before the production cuts will expire, in really, it's sort of emergency mode for a lot of folks, because you won't know, the market will not know whether or not these production cuts will continue or not just a few days before they expire. That puts a lot of pressure on the meeting, whether or not OPEC and Russia will be able to come to terms, because they, in the end of 2016, joined together to bring some production cut and bring some clarity to the market and take some of that production value out of the market. But now that they put off that April meeting, a lot of folks that we're speaking with are saying perhaps there's some cracks in that relationship now that they're canceling that. And you've seen just the messaging from Saudi minister in Russia kind of a little different. Saudi is very strong on continuing production cuts until the market is at balance, whereas the Russian ministers have been saying, we're really not sure where the market is at the moment. It might not require more production cuts. So that's where we are at the moment, and everyone will be watching that meeting in June.
Well, as you probably know, the supply cuts came in because of the concerns of oversupply. And then, of course, there are several points across the globe that talked about the fall in global growth as well. But let's for now turn to what's making headlines across the globe. Rami Inocencio of Bloomberg News brings you the first word headlines.
U.S. Agriculture Secretary says China could triple its purchases of American farm goods as part of a trade deal between the countries. Sonny Perdue told Bloomberg that the latest trade talks are very dynamic, but there are still concerns over how to make commitments enforceable. He said all agreements must be fixed and any tariffs will be binding.
Is one tool for enforcement, and hopefully the Chinese will understand that. It's a matter, it's like really complying with the law. If you comply with your agreement, you don't have anything to worry about. If you don't, then there are consequences, and that needs to be that.
Reports from London say the EU will formally agree to delay Brexit when leaders meet in Brussels later this week. The Guardian newspaper says the offer will be good until shortly before midnight on the 29th. Theresa May's whole Brexit strategy has been blown off course. That's as the Speaker of the House of Commons refuses to allow her to bring the twice-defeated departure deal back for a new vote.
Should not be regarded as my last word on the subject. It is simply meant to indicate the test which the government must meet in order for me to rule that a third meaningful vote can legitimately be held in this parliamentary session.
Boeing has written to airlines to confirm it's working on a software upgrade for the 737 MAX, saying it should be released soon. CEO Dennis Muilenburg adds that new pilot training should also address safety issues. Shares tumbled as the approval process for the 730 MAX came under investigation. We've been told a Transportation Department inquiry into Boeing began before last week's fatal Ethiopian Airlines crash. And at least 79 people are now known to have died, and another 43 are missing as rescue efforts continue in the flooded Papua province of Indonesia. The flash floods were triggered by 7 hours of torrential rain on Saturday. Almost 5,000 people have been displaced, with hundreds of houses severely damaged. Global news 24 hours a day on air and at TikTok, on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Ramy Inocencio, and this is Bloomberg.
L&T, on the other hand, came out last evening with an announcement that it has acquired 20.3% stake from VG Siddhartha, who's the founder of Cafe Coffee Day Group, and at 980 rupees a share. The company further said that it's going to acquire 15% from open market and then mount an open offer for 31%, potentially taking its stake to 66.3% going forward. The entire transaction will lead to a cash payout of nearly 10,700 odd crores, and L&T says that it plans to keep Mindtree as an independent listed entity. On the other hand, you had the Mindtree promoters who came out with a joint statement who were condemning the entire hostile takeover, and at the same time they reiterated that there is no synergies with this acquisition.
That's right. So this was a legal case that had gone on for more than a year. We saw Ericsson file a number of contempt petitions where they were claiming from the Supreme Court and asking the Supreme Court that they should be given the dues of rupees 550 crores. In the end, we saw the Supreme Court finally finding Anil Ambani and the three EDAG companies guilty of contempt and had given 4 weeks to clear the dues of Ericsson. Post that, we again saw this case land up at the NCLAT, where they were seeking the release of funds, the income tax refunds, which they said would enable them to clear Ericsson's dues. That plea was declined just days before the deadline, the 4-week deadline of the Supreme Court, which ends today, was filed, and the NCLAT declined to pass any direction for the release of funds. It was after that, yesterday, which was just days, 1 day before the deadline, that we saw ADAG come out with a statement and say that they have managed to clear the dues of Ericsson, which was also from support and support from the brother of Mr. Anil Ambani, Mr. Mukesh Ambani, and he issued a statement thanking him for the support.
There are several stocks that we need to look at today. Big news came in from Hotel Leela Ventures. Brookfield Asset Management to acquire 4 hotels and a land parcel from Hotel Leela Ventures for 3,950 crore rupees. The above 4 hotels would contribute around 80% of the total income and 88% of the total net worth of the company. And after this transaction, all the debt of the company from all banks and financial institutions stand repaid. HCL Tech entered into a shared services agreement with Xerox Corporation, pursuant to which Xerox will outsource certain global administrative and support functions from HCL. The transaction revenue over the course of 7 years will be $1.3 billion. Adani Ports approved buyback of NCDs worth 1,400 crore rupees. Aarti Industries to raise funds via QIP and to approve the price of equity shares to be allotted to qualified institutional buyers on March 22nd. And lastly, Tata Motors clarifies that JRL made voluntary recall of vehicles due to carbon dioxide issue, and the costs involved with this step are not material, reported by Bloomberg News.
If you look at the Yatra stock price, it's varied in the last 12 months between $3.71 and $8.12. So at some point you have to be pragmatic about your offer. Having said that, when we look at our travel portfolio today before Yatra, we conduct around $2.5 billion of GMV, gross merchandise value today. The moment you add Yatra to it, we would basically be an undisputed #1 in B2B, corporate, and so on. And we would conduct around $4 billion of GMV. So for us, it made sense. But what ultimately made sense, see, it's all about shareholder value. On one side, clearly, the fact that we're offering such a good premium, it offers tremendous value to Yatra shareholders. But when you look at an EBIC shareholder, we will inherit around $150 million of revenue and growing. And we believe, post synergies, we will get around 30%, $45 million of operating income, which basically translates into 25 to 30 cents of diluted EPS. So it kind of made sense for us.
Do you also have a backup plan in place in case the deal doesn't go through? Are you looking to increase the share price or whatever you're offering as a part of the deal to Yatra?
I think our offers, first of all, are always very firm. We don't if you look at the last 20 years, we have a legacy of not countering and doing all that. That's first. But I don't think that's going to happen. I personally believe that it's such a generous offer that it's very difficult for a Yatra board not to accept it. That's how I feel presently.
How do you aim to turn around Yatra ship? Now, Yatra has reported a profit for the quarter, but it is yet to report full year profit. Now, how do you aim to turn around the ship, and what plans do you have for Yatra?
So I'll tell you, first of all, let's take a step back. And I bought companies in distress, and Yatra is not in distress by any means. I bought 13 companies in distress and converted them into 35% operating income margin companies, and that's a history that I'm fairly proud of. So when I look at Yatra is not in distress. Yatra's management has done all the right things. They have reduced their costs, they have tried to increase their revenues, they're starting to get out of businesses that don't make sense. So I feel they've already taken the right steps. And now when you synergize the businesses, to give you a very simple example, if there are 2 finance groups, there won't be 2 finance groups, there won't be 2 HR groups, because this will ultimately be one company. When you merge Yatra into our EBIC's cash operations in India, you take out the cost of the audits and the HRs and the finance, and technologies will become constant, whichever technology survives, whether ours or theirs, it doesn't matter, it's one company. At the end of the day, you synergize and you have common call centers and those kind of things. And the consumer gets tremendous value at the end of the day. And the providers get better value, and you in the process are becoming more and more efficient and make more money. So we see that post synergies, we feel that there is 3 to 6 months of work that will be required. And we have a plan that we would want to execute. And we believe we can convert Yatra into a 30% operating margin company.
Well, let's hope that's a trend that actually catches on. Let's talk about some of the stories that are available on the website today. We've already spoken about quite a few of them, and you'll find more details on the website. You'll also find all the live market action over the course of the day. Here are a couple of more stories. The Appellate Tribunal has refused to stay the National Company Law Tribunal's order approving ArcelorMittal's bid to take over insolvent SR Steel. The global steelmaker will pay 42,000 crore rupees against financial creditors' claims of more than 49,000 crore. Now, Jet Airways yesterday defaulted on payments to its debenture holders for the third time since January, even as Chairman Naresh Goyal assured the employees of a resolution. He said, though, that more time was required to clinch a bailout. That's all you need to know going to trade today. Do stay tuned over the course of the day for all the live market updates and more in the world of business. This is Bloomberg Quint.